All right, so today we're diving deep into something you've probably seen in those headlines, all about Gen Z and anxiety.
Yeah.
But we're going way beyond the headlines today, using this book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation.
Okay.
And trust me, it's not just a book report.
Right.
We're going deep on the why behind these mental health struggles that seem to be plaguing Gen Z. You ready to unpack this?
I am. I'm ready. One of the things that I found so striking about Haidt's work is that he really pinpoints this very specific time frame, the early 2010s.
Oh, wow.
As the start of this surge in mental health issues. He calls it the Great Rewiring. And it almost seems like Gen Z woke up one day and they were on a different planet.
Yeah, it's such a powerful image, right?
It is.
Like they were the first generation raised on Mars or something.
Yeah.
But the thing is, Haidt doesn't just stop at these vivid descriptions.
Right.
He backs it up with data. Hard data.
Yeah.
And not just from the U.S. either.
Yeah. Exactly. He pulls in data from across Western nations, and they all show the same trend. It's like this giant flashing sign, pointing to some common factors that are causing this, that transcend any kind of national borders.
Okay.
And those big culprits, according to Haidt, smartphones, social media, and this whole culture of overprotection, all converging at the same time.
Okay, so let's break down this great rewiring a little bit.
Okay.
Because one of the things that really got me thinking was this idea of technology as an experience blocker.
Okay.
It's like, okay, think about this. Like if you only ever showed a baby videos of other people walking, would they ever learn to walk themselves?
It's such a brilliant analogy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because what he's getting at is that Gen Z is missing out on these crucial experiences that are so important for building that resilience and developing, a really solid sense of self. You think about things like free play, just kids running around, like figuring things out on their own, navigating all those little conflicts that inevitably come up.
And that's where the data really hits hard.
Yeah.
Because Haidt shows how free play and this face-to-face time with friends, like it just took this nosedive right when smartphones became ubiquitous.
Right.
Like it's not just a coincidence.
Yeah.
It's a correlation that's screaming, pay attention.
Yeah. And what's so fascinating is this coincides with a really critical period of brain development.
Right.
Adolescence. You see, during puberty, there's this process called neural pruning,
Right.
where the brain basically starts to get rid of connections that aren't being used.
Okay.
And it strengthens the ones that are.
Oh.
Almost imagine like a sculptor chipping away at a block of marble to reveal that statue inside.
So the brain is basically being sculpted during those teenage years.
Yeah.
And the experiences you have or don't have play a huge role in shaping who you become.
Exactly. And so now, on top of all this, you layer on the addictive designs of social media, and these algorithms that are just constantly battling for our attention, especially the attention of teenagers.
Right.
There's a line in the book that really sent chills down my spine. He says, "We should be concerned about those experiences and not let strangers and algorithms choose them."
It's kind of terrifying when you put it that way.
It is.
And, when you look at the specific impacts of social media, it's not the same for everyone.
Right.
Haidt actually found some pretty significant gender differences.
Yes. This is where it gets really nuanced.
Okay.
Because on average, it seems like girls are much more vulnerable to the anxieties that come with social comparison.
Right.
And, they're bombarded with all these images of perfection.
Yeah.
It's so easy to fall into that trap of feeling inadequate.
Totally.
And then on top of that, you add cyberbullying, which can be so relentless and incredibly damaging.
Yeah, he even has this chart in the book that shows this, like, dramatic rise in girls who identify as social media super users.
Yeah.
Meaning they're spending 40+ hours a week on these platforms.
Wow.
I mean, that's practically a full-time job.
It is.
And then with boys,
yeah,
it's not that social media is harmless,
right,
but the challenges kind of manifest differently.
They do. We see this long-term decline in engagement with things like school and work and even family life.
Wow.
And there's this stronger pull towards video games and pornography.
Which is another can of worms.
Yes.
But speaking of challenges,
yes,
Haidt also spends a lot of time talking about this idea of safetyism
Right.
and the decline of free play.
Right.
He uses this interesting term, anti-fragile, which is basically this idea that kids, like trees, need some wind to grow strong.
Yeah, I love that.
Right. They need a bit of risk and challenge to actually develop resilience.
I agree. And what's happened is parents, often out of fear, have created this bubble-wrapped childhood for their kids.
Right.
They're so worried about them getting hurt or failing or facing any kind of discomfort that they end up inadvertently hindering their development.
It's like that saying, prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child.
Yes.
But Haidt gives some pretty compelling examples of how this backfires.
He does.
Remember the story about the playground spinner?
Yes.
Or that concept of the age of roaming where kids were allowed to just wander their neighborhoods and explore?
Right.
Makes you wonder if we've lost something important along the way.
I think we have, and this overprotection ties directly back to this rise of safetyism, this whole culture of trying to eliminate all risk,
right? Which
ironically makes us more fragile in the long run.
Yeah. Okay. So we've kind of laid out the problem here.
We have.
But where do we go from here? Haidt does offer some solution.
Yes.
And it starts with understanding what he calls the 4 foundational reforms.
Okay.
And we're going to dive into those next time.
Okay.
But just to give you a sneak peek,
right.
It involves some pretty big changes in how we approach smartphones, social media, schools, and yes, even playtime.
That's right. Welcome back to our deep dive into the anxious generation. In part 1, we explored how this great rewiring of childhood with, the rise of smartphones and social media and this trend of overprotection has really contributed to this anxiety epidemic that we're seeing in Gen Z.
It is pretty wild, to see how those shifts in technology and parenting styles line up so perfectly with the mental health data.
They do.
But I'm ready to move beyond just feeling overwhelmed by the problem.
Yeah.
I want to know, what can we actually do about it?
Well, and Haidt doesn't just leave us hanging with a bunch of scary statistics. No. He actually lays out some pretty concrete solutions. Oh. And it starts with recognizing that we've created a system where companies are basically incentivized to exploit our attention, to keep us hooked on these platforms, often at the expense of our, well-being.
Right. It's like this race to the bottom of the brainstem. But how do we actually change that?
Yeah.
How do we make these companies more accountable for the well-being of their users?
Yeah, right.
Especially when it comes to kids.
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that Haidt highlights is something called the UK's Age-Appropriate Design Code.
Oh, okay.
It basically sets out a list of design standards aimed at making the online world safer for children.
So it's not just about saying, don't let kids on social media.
Right.
It's about actually changing how these platforms are designed from the ground up.
Exactly. One of the key principles of the code is that default settings for children's accounts should be set at the highest level of privacy, which right now is often the opposite.
That's so true. It's like they're designed to collect as much data as possible.
Right.
Without really even considering the impact on young minds.
Right.
But this code actually forces them to think about that.
Yeah, and Haidt argues that we need a similar approach in the U.S.
Okay.
He also suggests raising the age of what he calls internet adulthood to 16.
Okay.
Meaning no signing up for social media or giving away your data before then.
Yeah, we have age restrictions on all sorts of things that could harm kids.
Right.
Like driving, voting, buying alcohol.
Exactly.
So why not apply that same logic to the online world?
Yeah.
Which can be just as risky,
yes,
if not more so at that age.
And he also tackles the thorny issue of age verification.
Right.
Because right now it's way too easy for kids to lie about their age and access platforms that are meant for adults.
Yeah.
So he proposes a system of device-based verification where parents could essentially flag their child's device as belonging to a minor.
So it would be like a signal to these companies saying, hey, this person is under 16.
Right.
Don't let them access this content. I love that.
Yeah.
That puts more power back in the hands of parents.
And remember, it's not just about what happens online.
Right.
Haidt is also advocating for changes in the real world.
Okay.
Specifically, rolling back this trend of overprotection that we were talking about earlier. And he actually collaborates with Lenore Skenazy, the free-range kids lady in the book.
Oh, yeah. I've heard of her. Isn't she the one who got, like a ton of flack for letting her 9-year-old ride the subway alone.
That's the one.
Yeah.
And they both argue that we need to give kids more independence, allow them to experience those like small risks and challenges that really help them build resilience, and to actually protect the parents who choose to parent this way. Haidt even calls for legislation that clarifies the meaning of neglect.
I see what you mean about concrete solutions.
Yeah.
He's not just talking about the problem. He's actually offering ways to fix it. And schools seem to be a big part of that.
Absolutely. Haidt believes that schools can play like a crucial role in creating a healthier environment for kids. And he suggests 2 major changes. 1, going phone-free. And 2, becoming more what he calls playful.
Okay, let's start with the phone-free thing. I know a lot of schools already have like policies around phone use. But Haidt seems to be talking about something more radical.
He's advocating for a complete elimination of phones during the school day. And not just for students, for teachers as well. You know, imagine a school where those little glowing rectangles are nowhere to be seen.
It's kind of hard to picture, to be honest.
I know.
But I can see how it would create like a totally different atmosphere. Like what would happen if kids could just be present with each other without that constant distraction.
Well, and that's exactly the point that he's making. Because smartphones aren't just like damaging to learning, they're damaging to relationships. And he cites studies that show students' sense of belonging in school actually declined as smartphone use increased.
That's actually really sad.
It is.
Like these kids are surrounded by people, yet they're feeling increasingly lonely.
And that's where the playful part comes in. You know, Haidt suggests things like longer recess periods with like minimal adult intervention. He talks about this amazing program called Play Club, where kids just get together after school for like unstructured, device-free playtime.
I love that. Just letting kids be kids. But I imagine some parents might be like hesitant to like let their kids loose with no supervision.
Well, he actually shares a story about a school principal who was initially very skeptical of Play Club, but ended up becoming a huge advocate. Because he saw the positive impact firsthand. You know, the kids were more focused, less anxious, and their social skills like improved dramatically.
Those real-life examples are so powerful.
They are.
It's not just theory. It's actually working.
And the best part is schools don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There are so many simple things they can do to like encourage play and connection, like creating nature playgrounds, opening up the playground before school starts, even just bringing back old school games like tag or Foursquare.
It's about giving kids the freedom to like use their imaginations to get messy, to figure things out on their own.
Exactly.
Which, if you think about it, is exactly what they need to thrive in the real world too.
And it makes you wonder, what would happen if we shifted our priorities in education away from just like academic performance and started focusing more on the whole child? What if we saw play not as a distraction from learning, but as an essential part of it?
I'm really excited to dig into the next part where we talk about what parents can do. Because at the end of the day, we have like a huge influence on our kids' lives. And I think a lot of us are feeling pretty lost in this digital age.
Absolutely. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll delve into Haidt's specific recommendations for parents. We'll unpack those 4 foundational reforms in more detail. And really explore, you know, some practical strategies for creating a more balanced and connected family life.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the anxious generation. We've covered a lot, you know, from that whole great rewiring of childhood to these like big systemic changes that Haidt is proposing for governments, tech companies, schools. But now let's get down to brass tacks. Like, what can you, the parents listening, actually do to help your kids thrive in this crazy digital world,
You know, it's so easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this.
But one of the most empowering things that Haidt really emphasizes is that we're not powerless. Like as parents, we have a huge influence. And the choices that we make can actually make a real difference.
So true. But I mean, in those earlier parts,
right.
we talked about these big, like, systemic changes, right?
Okay.
The kind of stuff that just feels way beyond our control as individuals.
Right.
So what can we actually do within our own families to start, like, shifting things in the right direction?
Well, a lot of it comes back to those 4 foundational reforms that we mentioned before. No smartphones before high school.
Okay.
No social media before 16. Phone-free schools. And a big increase in unsupervised play.
Right. Those 4 pillars.
Yeah.
I mean, they sound simple enough on paper.
They do.
But I think for a lot of parents, they probably feel, like, incredibly difficult
to implement, you know? Like, how do you even begin to push back against these norms when it feels like every other kid has a smartphone and is on Instagram?
Right, and it's totally understandable to feel that way. Like, we're swimming upstream here, for sure.
Yeah.
But what Haidt really drives home is that it's not about being this, like, perfect parent who never makes a mistake.
Right.
It's about trying to shift those societal norms, like one family at a time. And honestly, each choice that we make could actually make it a little easier for others to follow suit.
So it's kind of like this domino effect.
It is.
Like the more families that kind of embrace these changes, the less pressure there is on kids to, you know, have a smartphone or be on social media at such a young age.
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of communicating with our kids.
Okay.
And not just in a because I said so kind of way, right?
Yeah.
It's about, like, having these open and honest conversations about the potential downsides of technology and, you know, why we might choose to delay certain things or set, like, certain boundaries.
So it's not just about, like, laying down the law.
Right.
It's about actually, like, educating them.
It is.
About how these platforms work, like about those addictive design features.
Exactly.
So they can actually start to, like, make more conscious choices themselves.
Right, because knowledge is power.
Yeah.
You know, when kids actually understand how these algorithms are designed to keep them hooked, they're less likely to fall prey to them.
Okay, so let's unpack those 4 reforms a bit more.
Okay.
First up, no smartphones before high school. I mean, I know a lot of parents feel like they need to give their kids smartphones for, like, safety reasons. So how do we even push back against that?
Well, and Haidt acknowledges that concern, absolutely.
Okay.
But he makes the point that a basic phone can still provide that sense of security without, like, opening up the floodgates to the constant internet access and the social media that, you know, that a smartphone brings.
Right.
And he suggests, like, talking to other parents in your community, trying to build a consensus around, like, delaying smartphone use.
Right.
You know, if several families agree to hold off it, it takes some of that pressure off of individual kids.
It's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so much easier to make these changes when you're not the only one doing it.
Right, right.
And then there's the social media piece. No social media before 16.
Right.
I mean, this one feels especially tough to, like, navigate, right? When it seems like social media is, like, basically synonymous with teenage life these days.
It is, but, you know, again, it comes back to, like, setting boundaries, having those conversations.
Yeah.
Explain to your kids, like, why you're making this choice. Talk about the potential downsides, especially during those, like, early teenage years when they're already, like, going through so much.
And, like, offering alternatives, right? You know, like, encouraging them to, you know, get involved in real-world activities, spend time with their friends in person, explore their interests offline.
Exactly. And remember, even if you do delay social media, your kids are still going to be exposed to it.
Right.
They'll see things online. They'll hear about it from friends.
Yeah.
So use those opportunities to have those conversations, to, like, help them develop a critical lens for what they're seeing.
Right. It's about teaching them, like, those media literacy skills.
It is.
Helping them understand that what they're seeing online isn't always a true reflection of reality.
Yeah.
Okay, next up, phone-free schools.
Yeah.
We talked about this in part 2.
We did.
And obviously, like, parents can't single-handedly make this happen, but we can certainly advocate for it, right?
100%. Like, talk to teachers, principals, school board members, push for policies that limit phone use during the school day. Let them know that you support this and why.
And last but not least, that increase in in unsupervised play.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this one always feels like a bit counterintuitive in our current culture.
It does, but both Haidt and Skenazy really hammer this point home.
Yeah.
Kids need opportunities to take risks, to make mistakes, to figure things out for themselves without an adult hovering over them.
And they give so many great ideas in the book.
They do.
Like creating adventure playgrounds, letting kids walk or bike to school on their own, encouraging them to explore their neighborhoods.
Right, and it really doesn't have to be complicated.
Right.
Sometimes it's as simple as just stepping back and letting them run wild in the backyard.
Yeah.
Or setting up a play date with minimal adult intervention.
And here's something I think a lot of us forget.
Yeah.
We need to be good role models.
We do.
If we're constantly glued to our phones,
yes,
our kids are going to pick up on that.
You're so right. Modeling those healthy habits.
Right.
Showing our kids that we value those face-to-face interactions and, those real-world experiences. That's so powerful.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I mean, what's the one thing that you hope parents will kind of take away from all of this?
Honestly, the biggest takeaway is that we're not alone in this. So many parents are feeling overwhelmed by this digital world, and they're worried about the impact it's having on their kids.
Right.
But there is hope. By making these conscious choices, by talking to our kids, by advocating for change, we can actually create a healthier and more balanced future for the next generation.
It's about finding that sweet spot, right? Between embracing those benefits of technology while also protecting our kids from its potential harms.
Yeah.
And it's about, rediscovering those simple joys of childhood.
Yes.
Those experiences of play and connection that are just so essential.
They are.
For their development.
Well said. It's it's time to start creating those ripples of change,
Yeah.
One family at a time.
And remember, we're here to support you on that journey.
Absolutely.
Be sure to check out those show notes for link to all the resources that we mentioned.
Yes.
And until next time, happy diving.